A blizzard, a missing baby, and a stranger holding the one thing that proves he was real. This story will take you deep into the frozen wilderness, where nothing is what it seems, and survival depends on trust across impossible boundaries. Thank you so much for watching and for all your comments. Let me know at the end if you liked this story, and where you're watching from and why you're following this. Sarah Bennett clutched her infant son tighter against her chest as the wind howled outside their small cabin in the Arizona Territory. The winter of 1887 had been particularly harsh, with blizzards ravaging the frontier settlements. Her husband, Thomas, had left 3 days ago to fetch supplies from the nearest town, promising to return before the worst of the storm hit. "It's all right, William," she whispered to her 6-month-old son, who stirred restlessly. "Your father will be home soon." The cabin creaked under the force of the wind. Sarah moved to the small window, wiping away the frost to peer into the swirling white darkness. Nothing but snow as far as she could see. Their cabin sat isolated at the edge of the settlement, closer to Apache territory than most dared to build. Sharp cracks split the air. Sarah jumped back as a large branch crashed against the side of the cabin. William began to cry. She soothed, rocking him gently. "It's just the storm." But as night fell and the temperature dropped further, Sarah's worry deepened. The fire was dying, and their supply of firewood was dwindling. Thomas should have returned by now. She wrapped William in his special blanket, a beautiful handmade piece with intricate patterns that Thomas's mother had made before she passed. It was their most treasured possession, soft blue wool with white stars carefully embroidered in each corner. "We need more wood," she said to William, as if the infant could understand. "I'll just step outside for a moment. The woodpile is right by the door." Sarah placed William in his cradle near the fire and wrapped her shawl tightly around her shoulders. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door and was immediately assaulted by the biting cold. The snow was deeper than she expected, nearly to her knees. She pushed forward toward the woodpile, gathering what she could carry. The wind suddenly intensified, whipping her shawl away from her body. Sarah turned to catch it and lost her footing, falling hard into the snow. By the time she regained her balance and gathered the wood, her hands were numb with cold. She stumbled back to the cabin, pushing the door open against the wind. The blast of air that followed her in extinguished the fire completely, plunging the cabin into darkness. No. Sarah scrambled to relight the fire, her frozen fingers fumbling with the matches. It took 3 attempts before the kindling caught. As the flames slowly grew, casting flickering light across the cabin, Sarah turned to check on William. The cradle was empty. "William?" Her voice broke as panic surged through her. She looked under the cradle. Behind it, dropped to her knees to look under the bed. "William!" The door to the cabin stood slightly ajar, rocking gently in the wind. With rising horror, Sarah realized what had happened. The powerful gust had not only extinguished the fire, but had somehow blown her baby from his cradle. She ran outside, screaming his name into the howling storm. The snow was falling so heavily, she could barely see a foot in front of her. "William, my baby, William!" Sarah searched frantically around the cabin, digging through snowdrifts with her bare hands, the cold long forgotten as terror took over. Hours passed as she searched wider and wider circles, calling until her voice was hoarse. By dawn, the storm had begun to ease. Sarah stood in the snow, her clothes frozen to her body, face streaked with tears that turned to ice on her cheeks. There was no sign of her son. As the morning light strengthened, revealing the vast white landscape around her, Sarah saw movement in the distance. A figure on horseback, approaching slowly. "Thomas," she whispered, hope flaring briefly. But as the rider drew closer, she realized it wasn't her husband. It was an Apache man, bundled against the cold, leading a second horse behind him. He stopped several yards from her, regarding her with caution. "Please," Sarah called, her voice cracking. My baby, have you seen my baby? The man said nothing for a long moment, then turned to gesture behind him. A woman emerged from the trees, walking carefully through the snow. In her arms was a small bundle. Sarah's heart stopped. In the woman's arms was a little girl, perhaps 3 or 4 years old, with dark hair and solemn eyes. And clutched in the child's hands was William's blanket, the blue wool with white stars, unmistakable even at a distance. My son's blanket, Sarah whispered, staggering forward. Where did you find it? Where is my baby? The Apache woman approached cautiously, her eyes never leaving Sarah's face. The little girl in her arms buried her face in the woman's shoulder, still clutching William's blanket. Please, Sarah begged, her voice breaking. That's my son's blanket. Where is he? The man dismounted and spoke to Sarah in halting English. I am Nahilzi. This is my sister, Ayana, and her daughter, Talais. He gestured to the woman and child. We found no baby. Only Talais found this. He pointed to the blanket. Sarah felt her knees buckle beneath her. No, that's not possible. He was in his cradle. The wind ... the door. She collapsed into the Sinju. Snow, her body racked with sobs. Ayana handed Talais to her brother and approached Sarah, kneeling beside her. She placed a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder and spoke softly in Apache. Nahilzi translated. My sister says you are freezing. You will die out here. Come with us. I can't leave, Sarah protested weakly. My son ... my husband will return. The storm comes back, Nahilzi said, pointing to the darkening clouds on the horizon. We found tracks not far from here. Men on horses, not your people, dangerous men. Sarah looked up sharply. The Arizona Territory was known for bandits and renegades who took advantage of isolated homesteads. What kind of tracks? She asked. 6 horses. Men who carry many weapons. They passed during the night. A new fear gripped Sarah's heart. If outlaws had been near during the storm, ... double quotes. Did they ... could they have taken my son? Nahilzi exchanged a glance with his sister before responding. We do not know, but you cannot stay here alone. Sarah looked back at her cabin, then at the blanket in the little girl's hands. Talais was watching her with wide, curious eyes. Where did you find it? Sarah asked the child directly, though she knew the girl couldn't understand her. Nahilzi translated the question. Talais responded in a small voice, pointing to the east. She found it caught in bushes, Nahilzi explained. Near the river crossing. We searched but found nothing else. Sarah closed her eyes, trying to think through her exhaustion and grief. The river was nearly a mile from the cabin. How could William's blanket have traveled so far? Unless someone had carried it, and him, my husband, she said suddenly. He will return to find me gone. We leave sign, Nahilzi assured her. If he is tracker, he will find. Sarah looked again at the approaching storm clouds. She had no choice. She couldn't continue searching alone, and if bandits were nearby, staying at the cabin was dangerous. Let me gather some things, she said, rising unsteadily to her feet. Inside the cabin, Sarah moved as if in a dream, collecting a few belongings, a photograph of Thomas, a change of clothes, the little wooden rattle William loved. Each item sent a fresh wave of grief through her. When she picked up William's tiny coat, she held it to her face, breathing in his scent, and allowed herself one more moment of unrestrained tears. When she emerged from the cabin, Ayana was waiting. The Apache woman took Sarah's bundle and secured it to the second horse. Then, with surprising strength, she helped Sarah mount as they prepared to leave. Talais approached the horse, still holding William's blanket. She held it up to Sarah with solemn eyes. No, Sarah said softly. You keep it safe for now. Nahilzi carved symbols into a post near the cabin door, a message for Thomas, should he return. Then they set off, heading east toward the Apache winter camp. As they rode, Sarah kept her eyes scanning the landscape, desperate for any sign of her son. The cold had numbed her body, but nothing could numb the ache in her heart. How far? She asked Nahilzi after they had been riding for several hours. Before nightfall, he replied. Our people stay hidden from soldiers, valley protected from storms. Sarah nodded. The relationship between settlers and the Apache was complex and often hostile, but there had been periods of peace. She knew that by accepting their help, she was placing her trust in people whom many of her neighbors considered enemies. As if reading her thoughts, Nahilzi spoke again. Why you live alone? So close to our lands? My husband. He believes in peace between our peoples, Sarah explained. He traded fairly with Apache before. He said the land called to him, and that good neighbors make strong communities. Nahilzi considered this. Your husband has wisdom, not like others. They continued in silence until they reached a narrow passage between rocky hills. Sarah noticed Ayana tense, her eyes darting to the ridgelines above them. What is it? Sarah asked. This place sometimes bad men watch, Nahilzi explained in a low voice. Stay close. They proceeded cautiously through the passage. Sarah felt exposed, imagining eyes watching from the rocks above. Just as they were nearing the end of the passage, a sound split the air, a rifle shot, followed by the ping of a bullet striking stone near them. Ride, Nahilzi shouted, spurring his horse forward. Sarah clung to her horse as it bolted after the others. More shots rang out, echoing between the rocky walls. She looked back to see several mounted figures emerge from a side canyon, giving chase. The men you saw? She called to Nahilzi. Yes, they follow our tracks. They raced out of the passage onto open ground, heading for a dense stand of trees in the distance. Sarah's horse struggled to keep pace, burdened as it was with a rider unaccustomed to such speed. A shout went up behind them. The pursuers were gaining. Suddenly, Sarah's horse stumbled, nearly throwing her. As she fought to keep her seat, something caught her eye, a flash of blue among the rocks to their right, blue like William's blanket. Wait, she cried, pulling desperately on the reins. I saw something, but there was no time to stop. Nahilzi circled back, grabbed her horse's bridle, and pulled her forward. No time. He shouted, They come. Sarah twisted in the saddle, straining to see the spot again, but it was lost behind them as they plunged into the trees, the sounds of pursuit growing ever closer. The trees provided temporary cover as they rode deeper into the forest. Sarah's mind raced. Had she truly seen something blue, or was it just her desperate hope playing tricks on her eyes? We must split, Nahilzi decided abruptly. Ayana, take her to the camp. I will lead them away. Before Sarah could protest, Ayana had grabbed the reins of her horse and pulled her in a different direction, while Nahilzi and Talise veered sharply to the right, making no attempt to hide their tracks. No, wait, Sarah called out. What I saw back there. Later, Ayana said in heavily accented English. First, safe. They rode hard for another hour, taking a winding path through the trees, crossing streams multiple times to disguise their trail. Eventually, they emerged into a sheltered valley where smoke from several fires rose into the evening sky. The Apache winter camp was nestled against a cliff face, protected from the wind and difficult to spot from a distance. As they approached, Sarah noticed curious eyes turning their way. Women paused in their work, and children stopped their play to stare at the white woman entering their camp. An elderly man stepped forward, speaking rapidly to Ayana in Apache. She responded respectfully, explaining something while gesturing toward Sarah. What's happening? Sarah asked. My father, Ayana said simply. Chief, he asks why you here. The chief studied Sarah with penetrating eyes before speaking again. Ayana translated. He says you may stay until storm passes. Then you must return to your people. Sarah nodded gratefully. Please tell him thank you. And tell him about my son, about what I saw. Ayana held up a hand to stop her. Rest first, eat, then we talk. Sarah wanted to argue but realized how exhausted she truly was. She hadn't slept since William disappeared, and her body was at its limit. She allowed herself to be led to a small wickiup where she was given warm blankets and a bowl of stew. Despite her exhaustion, sleep wouldn't come easily. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw William's face. Was he cold? Hungry? Was he even alive? And what of Thomas? Had he returned to find an empty cabin? She must have eventually fallen asleep, because she woke with a start to find morning light filtering through the wickiup's entrance. For one blissful moment, she forgot her circumstances, then reality crashed back upon her with crushing weight. Outside, the camp was already active. Women tended fires and prepared food, while men checked weapons and discussed something in urgent tones. Sarah spotted Nahilzi among them and hurried over. You're back. Did those men follow you? Did you see anything else near where I thought I saw something blue? Nahilzi raised a hand to slow her questions. Men followed me far north. I circled back in night. They are dangerous men raiders who rob both white settlements and our people. But what about what I saw? It could have been William's blanket. Or something else of his. I looked on my return. Found nothing blue, but... He hesitated. But what? Sarah pressed. Tracks. Small camp hidden in rocks. Recently abandoned. Sarah's heart raced. We have to go back and search properly. The chief approached, speaking to Nahilzi. Their conversation grew heated, with Nahilzi gesturing emphatically while the older man remained stern. Finally, Nahilzi turned to Sarah. My father says it is too dangerous. Raiders still search area. We must wait. I can't wait, Sarah cried. Every moment counts. If they have my son, if raiders have your son, the chief said in surprisingly clear English, rushing in will only endanger him more. He studied her face. I have seen many winters, white woman. I know patience brings what haste cannot. Sarah wanted to argue but saw the wisdom in his eyes. How long must we wait? One day, he decided. My son will send scouts. If raiders leave, then we search. It was the longest day of Sarah's life. She paced the camp, watching the horizon, jumping at every sound. Ayana tried to distract her by teaching her simple Apache words and showing her how they prepared medicines from local plants. Talais followed Sarah everywhere, still clutching William's blanket. The little girl seemed fascinated by Sarah's fair hair and would sometimes reach out to touch it before shyly pulling back. Why does she keep the blanket? Sarah asked Ayana. Ayana smiled sadly. Talais lost mother in raid last summer. Perhaps blanket gives comfort. Sarah felt a connection to the child, then both of them had suffered terrible losses. She knelt before Talais and gently touched the blanket. It's beautiful, isn't it? She said softly. My husband's mother made it for our son. Talais didn't understand the words, but she seemed to sense Sarah's meaning. She held the blanket out slightly, as if offering to share its comfort. As sunset approached, the scouts returned with news. The raiders had moved on, heading south toward the border. It would be safe to search the area in the morning. That night, a council was held. The chief spoke at length, with Nahilzi translating for Sarah's benefit. My father says we will help you search for your son and for your husband. But if we find nothing after 2 days, you must accept what the spirits have decided. Sarah nodded, though accepting William's loss seemed impossible. Why are you helping me? She asked. Our peoples have often been enemies. Nahilzi translated her question. The chief replied with dignity, gesturing to the children of the camp. He says children are sacred to all peoples. Apache do not war against the innocent, and ... Nahilzi hesitated. He lost a grandson to soldiers last year. He knows your pain. Sarah looked around the circle at these people who had every reason to hate her kind, yet were risking themselves to help her. She bowed her head in gratitude. "Thank you," she said. "I will never forget this kindness." As the council dispersed, Ayanna approached with Talais. "Child wants to give you this," she said. Tlis. He held out a small object, a tiny wooden horse, crudely carved but clearly made with care. "Her father made before he died," Ayanna explained. "She says it will help you find your son." Sarah accepted the gift with trembling hands. "Thank you, Talais," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. That night, as she lay awake in the wickiup, Sarah clutched the wooden horse and prayed harder than she ever had before. Tomorrow would either reunite her with William or confirm her worst fears. Outside, the wind carried the distant howl of wolves across the valley. Sarah shivered, not from cold, but from the terrible uncertainty of what daylight would bring. Dawn broke clear and cold. The storm had passed, leaving the crystalline sky above the snow-covered landscape. Sarah stood with Nahelzi, Ayanna, and 4 other Apache warriors, preparing for their search. "We returned to place where you saw blue," Nahelzi explained, helping Sarah mount her horse. "Then follow tracks I found." Talais approached, still holding William's blanket. She tugged at Ayanna's dress, saying something insistently in Apache. "What does she want?" Sarah asked. Ayanna looked troubled. "She says she must come. Says blanket will find baby." Sarah glanced at Nahelzi, who shrugged. "Children sometimes have strong medicine, but journey dangerous." "She can ride with me," Sarah offered, surprising herself. She had grown attached to the solemn little girl who seemed to understand her pain. Ayanna hesitated, then lifted Talais onto the horse in front of Sarah. The child settled against her, clutching both the blanket and the reins with determination. They rode out of the valley as the sun climbed higher, following a different route than before to avoid potential ambushes. By midday, they had reached the rocky area where Sarah thought she had seen something blue. "There," she pointed, "among those boulders." They dismounted, and the warriors spread out, examining the ground for signs. Nahelzi crouched, running his fingers over faint impressions in the dirt. "Many men camped here," he confirmed. "Left 2 days ago. Heading south." Sarah's heart sank. If the raiders had been here and then left, what hope was there of finding William? Suddenly, Talais squirmed from Sarah's grasp and ran toward a narrow crevice between 2 large rocks, still clutching the blanket. "Talais!" Ayanna called sharply, but the girl disappeared into the gap. Sarah rushed after her, squeezing through the narrow opening. Inside was a small sheltered space, just large enough for a person to hide. Talais was on her knees, digging frantically at something in the dirt floor. "What is it?" Sarah asked, kneeling beside her. The child unearthed a small object and held it up triumphantly. Sarah gasped. It was William's rattle, the one she thought she had packed at the cabin. "William was here," she whispered, taking the rattle with shaking hands. "Oh God, he was here." Nahelzi squeezed into the space behind them. Sarah showed him the rattle, her eyes wild with hope and fear. "This belongs to my son. The raiders must have him." Nahelzi examined the hiding place carefully. "This not raider camp. Too small. Someone else hid here." Before Sarah could respond, shouts came from outside. They emerged to find the Apache warriors in defensive positions, weapons drawn. In the distance, a rider was approaching at speed. Sarah shielded her eyes against the sun, trying to make out the figure. As he drew closer, her heart stopped. "Thomas!" She screamed, running toward her husband. Thomas Bennett reined his horse to a halt, disbelief written across his exhausted face. He practically fell from the saddle, catching Sarah in his arms. "Sarah, thank God!" he cried, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "I returned to the cabin and found it empty. I've been tracking you for days." "William," Sarah sobbed. "They took William." Thomas held her at arm's length, confusion clouding his features. What? Who took William? The raiders. During the blizzard, he was gone from his cradle, and now we found his rattle here in a hiding place, and Sarah. Thomas interrupted, his voice strange. Sarah, listen to me. William is safe. She stared at him, uncomprehending. What? William is safe, he repeated. He's with Mrs. Peterson in town. Sarah felt the world tilt beneath her feet. That's not possible. He was in his cradle. The wind blew the door open, and he was gone. Thomas guided her to sit on a nearby rock. When I reached town, the storm was too dangerous to return immediately. By the time it cleared enough to travel, there were rumors of raiders in the area. I didn't want to risk bringing William back through that danger, so I left him with Mrs. Peterson and came along to get you both to safety. But that's impossible, Sarah insisted. If William was with you, then whose blanket did Talise find by the river? She gestured to the Apache child who still clutched the blue blanket. Thomas looked at the blanket, then back at Sarah with gentle eyes. That's not William's blanket, Sarah. Of course it is. Look at the stars in the corners, your mother's embroidery. Thomas took the blanket from Talise, who released it reluctantly. He turned it over in his hands, showing Sarah the reverse side where no stars were visible. William's blanket had stars on both sides, he said softly. This is similar, but it's not the same. Sarah stared at the blanket, then at Talise, then back at the blanket. How had she not noticed? The pattern was similar, but not identical. The blue was a shade darker, the weave slightly different. But the rattle, she protested weakly, holding up the small wooden toy. Thomas took it, examining it closely. This isn't William's either. It's handmade, but not by me. He looked to Nahilze. Your people made this, didn't they? Nahilze nodded slowly. Many children have such toys. The truth dawned on Sarah with crushing force. There had been no miraculous clues, no trail to follow. Her grief and exhaustion had led her to see connections that weren't there, to build hope on nothing but wishful thinking. She sank to her knees in the snow, overwhelmed by conflicting emotions, relief that William was safe, shame at her mistake, gratitude toward these people who had risked themselves to help her. Ayanna knelt beside her, speaking softly to Talise. The little girl approached Sarah and gently took back the blanket and rattle. I don't understand, Sarah said. If these weren't William's, why did Talise keep them so close? Ayanna hesitated before responding. They belonged to her baby brother. He died in same raid that took her mother. Sarah looked at the solemn child with new understanding. Talise hadn't been helping Sarah find her son. She had been seeking comfort in the familiar objects that reminded her of her own lost family. Thomas helped Sarah to her feet. We should go soon. It's not safe here. Sarah nodded, then turned to Nahilze and the others. How can I ever thank you? You risked yourselves for a stranger's child. The Apache warrior inclined his head slightly. We are not so different. You and I, we both protect what is precious. As they prepared to depart, Talise approached Sarah one last time. She held out the wooden horse she had given her the night before. She wants you to keep it, Ayanna translated. To protect your son. Sarah accepted the gift, then impulsively embraced the child. Thank you, Talise. They parted ways at the edge of the valley, Thomas and Sarah heading toward town, the Apache returning to their camp. As they rode, Sarah told Thomas everything that had happened since the blizzard. They could have left me to die in the snow, she concluded. Instead, they showed more kindness than many of our own people would have. Thomas nodded thoughtfully. Perhaps when this trouble with the raiders is over, we could establish proper trade with them. Show our neighbors that not all white settlers come to take. Sarah leaned against her husband's back, exhaustion finally catching up with her. In her pocket, she felt the small wooden horse that Talise had given her. It had been meant to help find her son, and in a way, it had not by magic, but by connecting her with people who helped her survive long enough to learn the truth. As they crested a hill, The small frontier town came into view in the distance. Somewhere there, William was waiting, safe and warm. Sarah closed her eyes, offering a silent prayer of thanks for her son's safety, for her husband's return, and for the unexpected kindness of strangers who had become something more than that. Perhaps, she thought as they rode toward town, this harsh land didn't have to divide people after all. Perhaps, like the small wooden horse in her pocket, it could instead be something that connected them.